city of 1 million people once thrived in a desert while the rains failed for years. Its secret was the aqueduct, an ancient megacity's ultimate defense against drought. At its peak, Rome moved over 1 million cubic meters of water every single day through these stone channels, enough to fill a massive sports stadium from empty to overflowing. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the precise engineering genius that allowed entire civilizations to defy their climate and flourish. How did a society with no modern tools plot a water channel over 50 miles of hills and valleys with near-perfect precision? What hidden vulnerabilities were built into these magnificent lifelines? We often see these ruins as monuments to lost glory, but their true story is one of precarious survival. What does it take for a city to outlast its own thirst? Think of a place where 250,000 people lived, worked, and dreamed. In our modern world, that is a large city, but not an unusual one. 2,000 years ago, it was a staggering feat of human organization, a true megacity. These were not just large towns, they were dense, humming centers of power, trade, and culture, from Rome and Constantinople to the Maya metropolis of Tikal and the Khmer capital of Angkor. Their very existence, a simple, brutal reality. The environments that supported their explosive growth were often the same ones that threatened to starve them of their most vital resource. These were landscapes of paradox. Lush rainy seasons could give way to punishing dry spells that lasted for months or even years. A city might be surrounded by green, yet sit upon ground that swallowed every drop of rain. Take Tikal, deep in the Guatemalan rainforest. Annual rainfall there could be measured in feet, a seemingly endless supply. But the foundation of the entire region is a sponge of porous limestone. Water from those torrential downpours would vanish almost instantly, draining away into underground caverns. For the Maya, the surface was a place of perpetual thirst, even in a jungle. This is the genesis of the ancient water crisis. A booming population creates an unquenchable demand, while the local environment, through either climate or geology, cannot provide a reliable supply. Simple wells and household cisterns, solutions for a village, become utterly insufficient for a city of hundreds of thousands. When the rains fail, panic is not far behind. Social order fractures, economies collapse, and the great city begins to consume itself. It was this precise pressure, this looming shadow of catastrophe, that transformed water management from a matter of convenience into the single most important project of the state. The aqueduct was born not from ambition, but from absolute necessity. It was the engineered answer to a simple, terrifying question. How do you keep a giant alive when its homeland cannot provide enough to drink? The solution emerged from stone and mortar, a masterpiece of patient, relentless logic. To understand it, we must travel to the south of France, to stand beneath the arches of the Gard. This is not merely a bridge, it is a statement of intent carved across a river valley. 3 tiers of precisely cut stone rise 160 feet into the air, a stacked latticework that seems to defy its own weight. At its very top, hidden from view, runs a simple channel, just wide enough for a person to walk through. This was the Roman aqueduct in its most triumphant form, a mountain-moving project dedicated to delivering a single, humble resource, a steady trickle of water. Its power did not come from pumps or engines, but from an invisible, unwavering law, the gentle, unceasing pull of gravity. Roman engineers became poets of slope and gradient. Their goal was not a rushing torrent, but a calm, predictable flow that could travel 50, even 60 miles without stopping. To achieve this, they designed channels with an almost imperceptible decline. We are talking about a drop of perhaps only 1 foot for every mile of distance. Imagine tilting a table so slightly that a single drop of water takes a full minute to roll from one end to the other. That was the precision they sought. Maintaining this exact gradient over hills, across plains, and through valleys was their supreme challenge. They used simple but brilliant tools like a long, water-leveled surveying table to trace this perfect line across the landscape. It was a line of life, drawn with geometric certainty. The man who documented this science was Vitruvius, an architect and engineer whose 10 books on architecture became the enduring textbook of Roman engineering. He did not just describe how to build, he explained why. He detailed the construction from the ground up. The heart of the aqueduct was the specus, the water channel itself. This stone or concrete trough was lined with a special, slick mortar called opus, a mix of lime and crushed pottery that became almost glassy when set, sealing leaks and minimizing friction so the water would not slow down. And because even the best-built channel needs care, they built regular, vertical access shafts down to the conduit. These were not for water entry, but for human entry, allowing maintenance crews to descend and clear the inevitable silt, debris, or mineral deposits that would otherwise choke the flow over decades. This was a system built for centuries, not just seasons. All of this leads to the most iconic element, the arch. We see its beauty, but for the Romans, its true genius was structural. The arch is a shape that transforms crushing weight into outward thrust. Each stone in the curve presses against its neighbors, channeling the immense load of the masonry above down through the pillars and into the ground. This meant an aqueduct could stride across a deep valley on a line of elegant, open arches, using far less stone and material than a solid wall, while still maintaining that crucial, unwavering gradient from the distant hills to the city walls. It was efficiency made monument. This Roman template, this marriage of gravity's patience with the arch's strength, created the first truly pressurized urban water network. Water would flow into settling tanks, then through lead or ceramic pipes, rising to feed public fountains, bathhouses, and even the homes of the wealthy. It was a template so effective, so logically perfect, that it would echo through the centuries, a foundational blueprint for how a city could command its environment. Yet for all its grandeur, this system held a hidden, critical weakness, one that would determine the ultimate fate of the cities it served. But while Rome built its water highways in the open air, another civilization mastered a completely different approach, one born from a far more unforgiving landscape. In the vast, sun-scorched plains of ancient Persia, where surface water vanished in the relentless heat, survival demanded a more cunning strategy. Here, engineers did not conquer the horizon with towering arches. They instead turned to the earth itself, crafting a hidden network of veins that breathed life into the desert. This was the Qanat, a word that simply means channel, but describes one of the most sustainable water systems ever conceived. Picture a gently sloping tunnel, carved with hand tools through rock and soil, beginning deep within the foothills of a mountain range. Its builders, known as, possessed an almost intuitive understanding of geology. They would locate a water-bearing layer, an aquifer, trapped within the mountain, often by finding the faintest signs of moisture or specific vegetation. From this mother well, they began the monumental task of digging backward, away from their intended destination. The tunnel sloped downward just enough to let gravity pull the seepage from the aquifer into a gentle, continuous flow. But how do you dig a miles-long tunnel in complete darkness and ensure it maintains its precise grade? The answer lies in the Qanat's most distinctive feature, the line of circular wells that dot the desert surface above it. These were not sources of water, but shafts for air, light, and most importantly, for removing excavated material. Teams of diggers would sink a vertical shaft every 60 to 100 feet, down to the planned depth of the tunnel. From the bottom of each shaft, they would then dig horizontally to connect with the previous shaft, painstakingly aligning the tunnel's slope by using simple water levels and plumb lines. The result was a subterranean river, shielded from the evaporating sun and protected from contamination, flowing silently toward a thirsty settlement or a field of crops. The city of in modern Iran stands as a living testament to this ancient genius. Its Qanat system, still in use today, was begun over 2,700 years ago. Its main tunnel stretches for over 20 miles, with mother wells reaching depths of more than 100 feet. The water it delivers is not just reliable, it is naturally cooled by its journey through the earth, emerging in a central canal to feed orchards and public fountains. This was desert alchemy, transforming barren ground into fertile oases where cities like and could flourish. The Qanats' influence did not stop at Persia's borders. This brilliant adaptation to absolute aridity became a technology of empire and trade, spreading east along the Silk Road to China and west across North Africa, wherever people faced the tyranny of a rainless sky. It represented a profound philosophical shift in engineering, from the Roman model of commanding the landscape to a Persian model of collaborating with it, of finding water not by moving a river, but by inviting the mountain to share its hidden wealth. High in the thin air of the Andes, the stone city clings to a ridge between soaring peaks. It is a place that defies every modern instinct about where to build a metropolis. There are no broad rivers at its feet, no vast lakes to draw from. Its water source was the mountain itself, and the Incas understood that language fluently. To stand among its ruins is to witness a conversation between stone and water, a dialogue of perfect balance. The Incas did not fight their vertical world, they choreographed it. Their engineering marvel was not a single structure, but an entire philosophy of flow carved directly into the landscape. Across the steep slopes, they cut a delicate web of stone-lined canals called. These were not afterthoughts. They were the city's first infrastructure, laid down before the foundations of the great temples. They captured every possible source, from natural springs seeping out of the mountainside to the relentless drizzle of seasonal rain. The genius was in the gradient, a precise, gentle slope that maintained a constant, manageable flow without eroding the delicate channels. This water was then directed with meticulous intention. It would cascade from one terrace to the next, feed ceremonial fountains where its sound and purity were celebrated, and finally, supply the residential sectors. But the water's journey was only half the story. Its ultimate purpose was to sustain the terraces, those iconic green steps that cascade down the mountainsides like a giant staircase. These were far more than flattened planting beds. Each terrace was a self-contained hydrological unit. The retaining wall was built with carefully fitted stones, loose enough to allow excess water to weep through, preventing a buildup of pressure that would cause a catastrophic collapse. Behind the wall, layers of gravel, sand, and topsoil acted as a massive filter and sponge, storing moisture during wet periods and releasing it slowly during dry spells. This prevented both waterlogging and drought at the root level, a critical advantage in an environment where the weather could change in an instant. Water was more than a resource to the Incas, it was a sacred force, intimately tied to their cosmology. Its distribution was a ritual act, managed by priests and engineers who understood its life-giving power as a divine gift. This holistic vision meant that urban planning, agriculture, and water management were not separate disciplines, but interconnected threads of the same fabric. The terrace fed the city, and the entire system honored the mountain. It was a closed loop of resilience, enabling a sophisticated society to not just survive, but to thrive in one of the planet's most fragile and demanding ecosystems, by listening closely to the whispers of the earth and the flow of the sacred. Yet every lifeline has its breaking point. For all their genius, these aqueducts, Qanats, and canals faced a force that could outlast even the most patient engineering, a changing sky. The true test was not a single dry season, but a relentless, multi-generational shift in the climate itself. Today, scientists peer into the past through the science of paleoclimatology, reading the archives of the Earth. They examine the rings of ancient trees, where each narrow band tells of a year of struggle, and they pull up cores of sediment from lake beds, layers of mud that hold centuries of pollen and dust. These natural records reveal a sobering truth, the occurrence of periods of severe aridity that could grip a region for not just years, but for decades. Imagine a drought that begins when your grandparents are children and does not truly break until you yourself are old. This was the ultimate stress test for an ancient megacity. Consider the Maya of the Classic period, around the 9th century. Their civilization, centered in cities like Tikal, was a masterpiece of adaptation, with vast reservoirs carved into the limestone bedrock to capture every drop of the rainy season. But the tree rings tell a story of a prolonged drought, one that may have stretched for a full human lifetime. The reservoirs, for all their size, were finite. They were designed to bridge the gap between seasonal rains, not to withstand a permanent new reality where the rains simply did not come. As the water levels dropped year after year, the social contract built upon that water would have strained and then fractured. The authority of kings, who derived their power from a divine guarantee of abundance, would have evaporated alongside the last reserves. The engineering did not fail. It was simply asked to do the impossible. A similar shadow fell across the Khmer Empire at Angkor centuries later. It's those immense, rectangular reservoirs and its intricate canal network represented a staggering command of hydrology, turning the pulse of the monsoon into a controlled heartbeat for the city. Yet sediment cores from the region suggest periods of intense volatility, switching between extreme wet seasons and punishing dry spells. This erratic pattern would have been a nightmare for a system built on predictability. Canals could silt up from sudden floods, while reservoirs might sit half-empty for years. The system's very complexity could become a liability, requiring constant, labor-intensive maintenance that a stressed society might no longer be able to provide. This forces a difficult, reflective question. Did these magnificent waterworks ultimately delay a collapse, giving civilizations precious extra generations of stability? Or did they, in a cruel twist, create a dangerous dependency, allowing populations to swell in fragile environments to a point that could not be sustained without perfect function? The aqueduct did not just bring water, it brought the illusion of permanence. It allowed a city to believe it had conquered its environment, when in truth, it had only negotiated a temporary truce. When the climate shifted beyond the system's design limits, the fall was not just from a lack of water, but from the shattering of that foundational belief. The drama of their survival was always balanced on a knife's edge, between human ingenuity and the immense, indifferent forces of the earth. The final destination of an aqueduct was a place of quiet power. In the shadow of Vesuvius, within the bustling streets of Pompeii, stood a simple but critical structure, the water castle. This was not a grand fountain, but a fortified distribution hub where the long journey of mountain water ended and its urban life began. Here, the single, powerful flow from the aqueduct was tamed and divided. A system of sluice gates and lead pipes inside split the water into three primary channels. One was directed to the city's public fountains, another to the lavish public bathhouses, and the third to the private villas of the wealthy and to essential industries like fulleries for washing cloth. This mechanical triage at the terminus made one thing brutally clear: water access was a direct reflection of social standing. For the vast majority of Pompeii's residents, the public fountain was the center of their daily hydration. They would gather there with jars, exchanging news and gossip while collecting the family's water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. It was a communal ritual, but also a chore that defined the rhythm of a commoner's day. Meanwhile, the elite enjoyed the luxury of piped water right into their homes, feeding private basins and even small garden displays. This convenience was a visible marker of status, separating those who went to the water from those whom the water came to. This hierarchy of access had a direct and measurable impact on public health. Reliable, clean water from a protected source drastically reduced the spread of waterborne illnesses that could ravage a dense population. But the aqueduct's gift did not stop at delivery. Its constant flow created a new possibility: the systematic removal of waste. In Rome, the legendary Cloaca Maxima began as an open drainage ditch, but was later vaulted over with stone, transforming it into a true subterranean sewer. The aqueducts fed the public latrines and bathhouses, and this flush of fresh water was then channeled through the city's gutters and into these great sewers, carrying refuse away to the Tiber River. For the first time in history, a megacity could actively wash itself. This engineering marvel did more than prevent disease. It changed the sensory experience of urban life, reducing foul odors and standing filth that were the norm in earlier settlements. The influence of water even dictated the very bones of the city. The path of an aqueduct channel, often running atop arches or underground conduits, could determine where new neighborhoods were viable. Major streets were sometimes planned to run parallel to these watercourses for easy access, and the placement of essential public buildings, like the baths or the forum's fountains, was entirely dependent on where the water pressure was sufficient. The aqueduct was the true circulatory system of the metropolis. Its pulse, the steady gravitational flow, dictated where the city could grow, how clean it could stay, and the daily rituals of every single person within its walls, from the senator in his villa to the laborer at the public well. The stone channels were not just bringing a resource, they were scripting the narrative of urban life itself. Constantinople was a city that lived under the shadow of its own walls. As the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, it was a prize that enemies dreamed of capturing for centuries, which meant its survival depended on a simple, terrifying calculation. What happens when the aqueducts are cut? Rome's model of constant flow was a peacetime luxury. Here, engineers had to design for a state of perpetual siege, and their answer lay not just in channels that brought water in, but in colossal, hidden chambers designed to keep it locked safely inside. The Valens Aqueduct was the mighty artery, a stone channel carried on arches across the hills of Thrace, delivering water from springs over 60 miles away. It was a statement of imperial reach, but the Byzantines knew a single vulnerable line could be severed. So they built a second, invisible heart for the city deep underground. Beneath the bustling streets and palaces, they constructed hundreds of vast cisterns. The most famous is the Basilica Cistern, a cavernous space supported by a forest of 336 marble columns, rising from dark, still water. It feels less like a reservoir and more like a sunken palace dedicated to water itself. But these were not passive storage tanks. They were active components in a sophisticated hydraulic network. Water from the aqueducts would first flow into these subterranean basins. The immense volume acted as a buffer, stabilizing pressure across the entire city's pipe system, preventing surges or shortages in different neighborhoods. More critically, they were strategic reserves of staggering capacity. Historians estimate that Constantinople's cistern network could hold enough water to sustain the city's population for many months, perhaps even a year, without a single drop coming from the outside. This was resilience in gallons. The engineering philosophy here marks a profound shift. Where Roman aqueducts emphasized the graceful, uninterrupted journey, Byzantine hydraulics emphasized the fortress. It was a move from constant flow to managed reserve. Each cistern was built with thick, waterproof mortar and often lined with brick, designed to prevent leakage and protect the water from contamination. They were covered, keeping the water cool and reducing evaporation, a crucial consideration during a long summer siege. This system turned the city into a kind of self-contained island, hydrologically speaking. Even if an enemy army camped outside the Great Walls and destroyed the arches of the Valens Aqueduct, life within could continue. The public fountains would still flow, the bathhouses could still operate, and the population could hold out, buying precious time for relief forces to arrive or for the besiegers to succumb to their own logistical hardships. Constantinople's solution reflects how engineering is shaped by more than environment. It is shaped by fear and strategy. The threat of conflict was baked directly into the mortar. This vast, hidden infrastructure highlights a different kind of ancient genius, one that prioritized security over spectacle. It was no longer enough to command the landscape. You had to anticipate its betrayal and prepare a deep, dark well of patience in response. The true monument was not the aqueduct spanning the valley, but the silent, columned hall waiting beneath the city, holding a year of tomorrows in its still, dark water. That precise, gentle slope was not a happy accident, it was the product of an exacting science. To achieve it, Roman engineers had to become masters of the invisible line, tracing a path for water across 50 miles of rugged earth with an error margin of just a few inches. They did this not with magic, but with mathematics made physical through ingenious tools. The most critical of these was a deceptively simple device. Picture a wooden beam, about 20 feet long, supported on two legs. A water channel ran along the top of the beam. By filling this channel and observing the water's surface, an engineer could establish a perfectly level line with astonishing accuracy, even on uneven ground. If the wind was too strong for the water to settle, they had a backup, a simple plumb line suspended from the beam. This humble instrument was the guardian of the gradient, ensuring that every section of the aqueduct's channel maintained that vital, nearly flat decline. But before that could be used, the land itself had to be understood. For that, surveyors relied on This tool looked like a cross mounted on a pole, with plumb lines hanging from each of its four arms. By sighting along these aligned strings, a surveyor could establish perfect right angles and straight lines across the landscape, plotting the aqueduct's course with geometric certainty across fields and hills. This was the foundation, the initial act of imposing order on chaos. The real challenge, however, came in the calculations. How much water would a channel of a certain width and slope deliver? How much material was needed to build a reservoir for a city of 200,000? These questions demanded a firm grasp of geometry. Engineers had to calculate volumes for massive settling tanks, determine the cross-sectional area of water channels, and understand flow rates. They worked with formulas and ratios, their work recorded on wax tablets and scrolls. We catch a glimpse of their theoretical world through figures like Hero of Alexandria, a Greek engineer and mathematician who lived in the 1st century. His collected works, known as the are filled with designs for sophisticated devices, from steam-powered engines to automatic temple doors. More importantly, he detailed the principles of siphons, water screws, and the behavior of fluids and air pressure. This was not just tinkering, it was advanced mechanical theory. It tells us that the builders of aqueducts operated within a rich intellectual tradition, where practical problem-solving was supported by deep inquiry into the laws of nature. A single miscalculation in this chain of precision was not a minor setback, it was a civic catastrophe. An error in slope of just 1 degree over a 50-mile distance would raise or lower the channel's end point by over 4,000 feet. Water would either arrive with destructive force, eroding the channel walls, or worse, it would simply stop moving altogether, becoming a stagnant, algae-choked ditch miles short of the city walls. The entire monumental effort, years of labor and vast resources, would be rendered useless. This immense pressure is what transformed engineering from a trade into a high-stakes art. Every stone placed, every measurement taken, was a commitment to the future, a mathematical promise to a city that its thirst would be met. The aqueduct's graceful arc across a valley is what we remember, but its true strength was born in the quiet, dusty work of surveyors squinting along a plumb line, carefully marking the path of survival with numbers and angles. The gleaming stone of an aqueduct tells a story of geometry and grace, but its shadow holds a different tale. For every arch that spanned a valley, there were countless hands that never touched the cool water it carried. The true foundation of these megaprojects was not just stone and mortar, but a staggering mobilization of human effort, often extracted through systems of profound inequality. The Aqua in Rome stands as a perfect example, a channel stretching over 40 miles from its mountain springs to the city. Its construction was a 14-year marathon of labor, a continuous, grinding effort that demanded a workforce of thousands. This army of builders was a hierarchy of skill and status. At the top were the architects and engineers, the literate masters of mathematics and design who plotted the perfect gradient. Below them came the skilled artisans, the stonemasons who cut each block, the hydraulic specialists who mixed the waterproof mortar, and the metalworkers who forged the tools. But the vast majority of the bodies on the line were the unskilled laborers. They were the ones who dug the endless trenches, hauled the impossibly heavy stones, mixed the concrete, and moved the mountains of earth. Their ranks were filled by three primary groups: slaves, prisoners captured in Rome's endless wars, and laborers, ordinary citizens or subjects compelled by the state to contribute a set number of days of work each year as a form of tax. This was not a volunteer workforce. It was a machine of coerced labor, where the project's timeline and the empire's demands outweighed any individual's choice. The logistical challenge of sustaining this machine in the field was itself a monumental feat. For projects like the Aqua, which cut through remote countryside, temporary camps had to be established. These were rough, utilitarian settlements where workers slept in tents or simple huts. A constant supply chain had to deliver food, water, tools, and materials to these remote sites, a caravan of necessity snaking along unfinished stretches of the aqueduct's own path. Managing the health, security, and basic subsistence of such a large, concentrated group in an era before modern medicine or rapid communication was a constant, precarious balancing act. Illness or injury was a common and devastating reality, and the pace of work was relentless. This human cost forces us to see these wonders through a dual lens. They were lifelines that enabled urban civilization to reach dazzling heights of culture and comfort for some. Yet they were also monuments to a social order built on exploitation, where the freedom and security of the city dweller were purchased with the coerced labor of the unseen many. The water that flowed so freely from the public fountain was, in a very real sense, bought with years of toil under the sun. It is a reminder that the story of ancient engineering is not just one of intellect against nature, but also of power over people, a complex legacy where brilliance and burden are forever intertwined in the enduring stone. A finished aqueduct was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new, more delicate challenge. The grand opening ceremony faded, and the first clear rush of water flowed toward the city. Yet from that moment forward, the system's survival depended on a quiet, relentless battle against decay. The true test of engineering genius was not in the first stone laid, but in the thousandth repair made years later. This was the domain of the Aquarius, the Roman water curator, an unsung hero whose work was measured in absence, in the disasters that did not happen because of his vigilance. His duty was to keep the invisible lifeline alive, a task that required equal parts bureaucrat and detective. He patrolled the long, lonely stretches of the channel, inspecting the mortar for hairline cracks, checking the ventilation shafts for blockages, and listening for the telltale sound of a leak hissing where only silence should be. One of his greatest foes was not neglect, but theft. Unauthorized taps, where landowners would clandestinely breach the channel to divert water to their private fields, were a constant problem. The Aquarius had the authority to hunt down these illegal diversions and seal them, ensuring the public supply remained full. But his most routine and physically demanding battle was against the water itself. Over time, dissolved minerals in the water, primarily calcium carbonate, would precipitate out and coat the channel walls in a hard, rocky crust called sinter. This deposit, growing slowly year after year like a geological plaque, would steadily narrow the conduit, choking the flow to a trickle. Teams of workers known as the would descend through the access shafts, armed with chisels and hammers, to spend weeks in the damp, confined darkness, painstakingly scraping the channels clean. It was miserable, essential work. The system's longevity was a direct product of this permanent, institutionalized care. We see this bureaucratic mindset crystallized in the work of Sextus Julius, who served as Rome's water commissioner under the emperor at the end of the 1st century. Appalled by the corruption and disarray he found, did something remarkable: he wrote a book. His treatise was not a poetic celebration, but a practical, no-nonsense manual. In it, he meticulously catalogued every aqueduct, its source, its length, its capacity, and the precise allocations of its water to various public fountains, bathhouses, and private users. His goal was to create an unassailable record, a ledger of accountability. By publishing the facts, he aimed to starve the corrupt middlemen and inspectors who took bribes to overlook illegal taps or falsify flow measurements. Understood that the engineering was only half the solution, the other half was transparent, diligent management. He represented a profound realization that a megacity's survival depended not just on brilliant construction, but on creating a permanent, honest bureaucracy dedicated to the system's perpetual health. The aqueduct was not a monument to be admired. It was a patient to be monitored, a body whose pulse, the steady flow of water, had to be protected at all costs. This lesson in institutional stewardship, written on papyrus 2,000 years ago, echoes a timeless truth. The most fragile part of any great machine is not the stone or the pipe, but the human commitment to maintain it. A city's thirst could reshape the land for 100 miles around. The aqueduct's logic was beautifully simple: take water from where it is and move it to where it is needed. Yet this act of redirection, on the scale required to feed a megacity, was never a simple transfer. It was a transformation with profound and often unintended echoes. The Roman aqueducts, for all their precision, became powerful geological agents. To supply Rome's 1 million cubic meters of water daily, engineers tapped into distant springs and rivers, capturing their flow at the source. Over decades and centuries, this constant extraction could subtly but permanently alter the very waterways that made the system possible. A spring that once fed a local wetland might gradually diminish, its output unable to match the unceasing demand of the stone channel. A river diverted into an aqueduct intake would have less water remaining in its original bed downstream. This could affect communities that had depended on that river for generations, reducing their supply for irrigation, for livestock, or for their own modest mills. The aqueduct was a lifeline for one population, but it could become a slow-moving crisis for another, creating hidden tensions across the landscape. The environmental footprint extended beyond the water itself. Building a 50-mile stone channel required staggering amounts of material. While the Romans often stoned locally near the construction site, the demand for timber was immense. Wood was needed for scaffolding, for temporary supports in tunnels, for the machinery used to lift massive blocks, and for the countless tools and carts of the workforce. Clearing paths through forests to survey the route and to create access for builders could lead to significant local deforestation. This loss of tree cover, in turn, might accelerate soil erosion on hillsides, potentially silting up the very streams the aqueducts relied upon. It was a feedback loop they likely could not foresee. These realities force us to ask a difficult, modern-sounding question about sustainability. When an aqueduct or a Qanat taps an underground aquifer, is it withdrawing water faster than the natural world can replenish it? For a time, perhaps centuries, the answer might be no. The system operates in a delicate balance, but during a prolonged drought or as a city's population swells, that balance can tip. The water level in the mother well of a Qanat might begin a slow, irreversible decline. The spring feeding a Roman aqueduct might weaken, its output no longer matching the designed capacity of the channel. The engineers were solving an equation of human need, but the variables in that equation, climate and population, were never truly constant. This adds a crucial layer of complexity to their story. They were not just battling nature to provide a resource, they were becoming a permanent part of nature's own systems, with all the responsibility and risk that entailed. Their work embodies a timeless tension, the trade-off between immediate human survival and the long-term health of the environment that makes survival possible. In redirecting rivers and tapping deep aquifers, they were making a choice, one that every ambitious civilization eventually faces, prioritizing the thriving metropolis today while quietly borrowing from the landscape of tomorrow. The need to command water was a universal language, spoken in stone and earth across every continent. Far from the Mediterranean world, in the heart of the pre-Columbian Americas, two cities rose to staggering heights by mastering their own unique watery worlds in complete isolation. The first was a city that seemed to float. The glittering capital of the Aztec Empire was not built beside a lake, but directly upon it. Founded on an island in the vast, shallow lake, it faced a constant paradox, surrounded by water yet threatened by it. The lake's waters were brackish and undrinkable, and seasonal floods could swallow the city whole. The Aztec response was a masterpiece of aquatic urbanism. They did not fight the water, they invited it into the city's very blueprint. A network of canals, as vital as streets, crisscrossed the urban grid. These were not just for transportation, though canoes gliding past stone palaces were a common sight. They were the arteries of a brilliant agricultural system known as, often called, floating gardens. Builders would weave rectangular frames from reeds and willow branches, anchor them to the lakebed, and pile them high with nutrient-rich mud from the canal bottoms. These fertile, artificial islands never truly floated. They were rooted plots, separated by canals that provided constant irrigation and a transport route for harvests. They transformed the swampy lake margins into one of the most productive farming systems on Earth, capable of feeding a population that may have exceeded 200,000. But to protect this aquatic city, the Aztecs had to control the lake itself. Under the direction of visionary rulers they constructed massive dikes, or one great dike ran for miles, separating the fresh waters of the spring-fed eastern lakes from the salty western waters. It had sluice gates that could be opened or closed to manage water levels, prevent flooding during storms, and keep the city's canal water fresh. To bring clean drinking water from the mainland springs, they built dual-channel aqueducts of carved stone and compacted earth, carried on causeways right into the city's heart. It was a machine for living on water, a testament to engineering that worked in harmony with, rather than against, a fluid environment. A continent away, another megacity faced a different kind of water. Cahokia, near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, dominated the fertile floodplain around the year 1000. Its power was marked by enormous earthen mounds, the greatest rising 100 feet high. Here, water was not a permanent surrounding, but a cyclical force of creation and destruction. Cahokia's engineers orchestrated the landscape on a grand scale. They excavated a series of large, rectangular ponds and linked them with canals. This was not for agriculture in the same way as this network served multiple crucial purposes. It managed stormwater and runoff from the densely populated city, preventing erosion and messy, waterlogged streets. It likely provided a ready supply of clay and earth for the endless construction of mounds and houses. And it almost certainly had a profound ceremonial dimension. These carefully shaped bodies of water, positioned in relation to the great mounds, would have reflected the sky and the monumental architecture, doubling their grandeur and integrating water into the sacred geography of the city. The contrast between these two American powers could not be starker. It was a city of canals, a permanent aquatic society built on a lake it meticulously managed. Cahokia was a city of ponds and earthworks, sculpting a river floodplain to control water's ebb and flow. They had no contact with Rome or Persia, yet they arrived at the same fundamental conclusion, that a great city cannot be left at the mercy of the natural hydrology. Their independent innovations prove a powerful point. The drive to control water for urban life is not a cultural invention. It is a foundational human imperative. Whenever people gathered in great numbers, from the Valley of Mexico to the Mississippi bottomlands, the first and most important monument they built was not a temple or a palace. It was the system that would quench their collective thirst. The steady flow of water was a form of silent propaganda. When a new aqueduct was inaugurated, it was never just a technical achievement. It was a grand political spectacle. An emperor or king would stage a public ceremony at the terminal fountain, the first clear rush of water serving as undeniable proof of his benevolence and power. He was not merely opening a conduit, he was performing a miracle, bringing life itself to the heart of the city. This act was deeply symbolic, tying the ruler's legitimacy to the most fundamental human need. In a world where water deities were from Rome to Mesopotamia, controlling water was the next best thing to commanding the heavens. An aqueduct was framed as a gift from the ruler, a direct channel of divine favor to his people. It visually cemented a social contract. The populace received the security of clean water, and in return, they offered their loyalty and labor to the state that provided it. The utility was undeniable, but the message was even more powerful. Look to the Aqua Augusta, a masterpiece built to serve the Roman naval fleet at. This was the largest permanent fleet base in the ancient Mediterranean, home to thousands of sailors and the crucial warships that kept the empire safe. The aqueduct did more than quench their thirst, it fueled the entire military machine. Fresh water was essential for the crews living in close quarters, for the workshops repairing ships, and for the general sanitation of the sprawling base. By personally ensuring this supply, the emperor directly linked his own authority to the strength and readiness of the military. Water security was national security. This transforms our view of these stone channels from simple infrastructure into active tools of political theater. Every public fountain flowing in a city square was a daily, quiet reminder of who provided that comfort. Every bathhouse filled with citizens was a testament to the ruler's capacity to deliver not just survival, but civilization itself. The aqueduct became the ultimate symbol of a stable, prosperous reign, a literal lifeline that, once granted, made the idea of rebellion or chaos seem like a threat to the very water in the cup. It was a brilliant, lasting investment, buying not just public health, but unwavering public faith. The stones themselves confess the struggle. Walk the length of a ruined Roman aqueduct, and you will see more than a single, seamless design. Look closely at the mortar between the blocks, and you may find a jagged line where the original, creamy Roman concrete meets a rougher, darker patch of medieval brickwork. This is not a flaw, it is a fossilized moment of crisis, a repair made perhaps a century after the builders had gone. Archaeology gives us this forensic evidence of failure, a silent record of the moments when the lifeline faltered and the desperate work to restore it began. In the ancient Near East, within the deep cisterns of Canaanite cities, researchers have found thick, uniform layers of fine silt. This is not the gradual accumulation of years of use, but a sudden, catastrophic deposit. It tells a clear story. A prolonged drought dried up the water source. The cistern was left empty for a season that became a decade, and wind-blown dust slowly filled the basin, inch by inch, until it was abandoned entirely. The silt is the ghost of a drought, a geological memory of the day the water did not return. These breakdowns were not always slow. The mighty Aqua, one of Rome's greatest aqueducts, bears scars from a more violent event. Sections of its soaring arcades show clear signs of collapse and reconstruction, with entire spans rebuilt using different techniques and stone. Historical records point to a powerful earthquake in the region during the reign of the Emperor Augustus. The ground shook, the precise gradient was shattered, and a vital channel for the city fell silent. The repair was a monumental emergency project, a race against time to restore flow to a thirsty metropolis. Each mismatched stone in the rebuilt section is a testament to that urgency, a permanent reminder of nature's ability to undo, in an instant, what took generations to build. Half a world away, in the jungles surrounding Angkor, the story of collapse is written in mud. Core samples taken from the vast reservoirs and the intricate network of canals reveal alternating layers of silt and clean sediment. This pattern speaks of a system in distress. During periods of stable management, canals were regularly dredged, keeping the flow clear. But the cores show moments when thick layers of silt built up uninterrupted. This suggests a breakdown in the social order itself, a point when the immense, coordinated labor required for maintenance could no longer be summoned. Perhaps a shifting climate brought erratic floods that dumped more silt than the engineers could handle, or perhaps political turmoil diverted resources and attention. The clogged canals would have lowered the system's efficiency, reducing the water available for agriculture, which in turn could have weakened the state further, creating a vicious cycle of decline. Studying these failures is not about assigning blame, but about understanding the precise pressures that even the most brilliant systems could not withstand. It reveals their vulnerabilities, not as design flaws, but as inherent limits. They were machines that required constant feeding, with human labor, with political will, and with a climate that stayed within certain bounds. The patches in the stone, the silt in the cistern, the mud in the canal, they all whisper the same truth. These wonders were never finished. They were always becoming, always decaying, always being saved, until the day the will or the means to save them finally ran out. The fall of an empire did not mean the death of its water. The great stone channels, though silent for a time, held a value too fundamental to be forgotten. Across Europe, the medieval and Renaissance worlds did not see the ruins of Roman aqueducts as relics of a lost past, but as dormant giants waiting to be awakened. Their story did not end with antiquity, it simply entered a new chapter of adaptation and reuse, a physical thread connecting different eras of urban civilization through the unchanging need for water. In Rome itself, the city that had once boasted 11 great aqueducts fell into a period of contraction after the empire's collapse. The population dwindled, and the magnificent channels, severed by war or choked by neglect, fell silent. For centuries, Romans relied on the polluted Tiber River and shallow, contaminated wells. The memory of clean, abundant mountain water became a kind of civic myth. Then, in the 15th century, a powerful desire to restore the city's former glory turned back to these stone pathways. The focus was an ancient aqueduct built in the 1st century before the Common Era. Its source, a spring over 8 miles away, still flowed as reliably as ever. Papal engineers, under Pope Nicholas V, embarked on a heroic effort to find and clear the original underground channel. It was an archaeological dig fused with an engineering project, unearthing the precise Roman gradient stone by stone. Their success was monumental. By the mid-15th century, there was once again delivering fresh water to a revitalizing Rome. This was not merely about utility, it was about symbolism. The restored aqueduct became the lifeblood of the Renaissance and later the Baroque city. It fed the magnificent public fountains that defined this new era of artistic splendor. Its water cascaded into Fountain of the Four Rivers in the Piazza, and most famously into Fountain. The roaring spectacle of with its triumphant sculptures and rushing pools, is the direct descendant of that clear, cold spring and the Roman conduit that first captured it. The fountain is a Baroque masterpiece, but its essence is pure Roman engineering, a marriage of ancient practicality and modern artistry. This pattern of building upon the old bones of infrastructure repeated itself across the continent. In medieval cities from Paris to new growth often clustered directly atop Roman foundations. Old aqueduct channels, even if broken, provided a ready-made, perfectly surveyed route. Builders would repair sections, patch arches with brick, and redirect the flow to new cisterns or monastic complexes. The aqueduct in Spain is a stunning example of this continuity. While its exact origins are debated, its core is profoundly Roman. Throughout the Middle Ages, it was meticulously maintained by local authorities, not as a historical monument, but as the city's sole reliable water source. Its iconic two-tiered arches became the very emblem of the city, a daily reminder that their survival was literally supported by the ingenuity of a prior age. This enduring practicality reveals a profound truth about these structures. Their value transcended the culture that built them. A medieval mason might not have known the name of the engineer who calculated the original slope, but he understood the perfection of the line. A Renaissance pope might have seen the aqueduct as a tool for his own legacy, but he was participating in a tradition of stewardship that spanned a millennium and a half. The stones carried a kind of embedded intelligence, a logic so sound that it remained the best solution for centuries after the fall of the empire that laid them. This afterlife of the aqueduct shows that while empires and styles may rise and fall, the fundamental challenges of urban life and the brilliance required to solve them create a legacy that is stubbornly, beautifully persistent. The same principles that guided an engineer with a 2,000 years ago still shape the water in your tap today. Modern municipal water systems are, in their essence, vast, invisible Roman aqueducts. They rely on the same unwavering force of gravity to move water from a high-elevation reservoir, often in distant mountains, through networks of pipes to our homes and businesses. That constant, gentle gradient is still the silent, efficient engine of delivery, proving that some solutions are so elegantly logical they transcend time. Similarly, the ancient Qanat finds its echo in contemporary technology. In arid regions around the world, from the American Southwest to North Africa, engineers use advanced horizontal drilling techniques to tap into deep, confined aquifers. While the machinery is modern, the goal is identical to that of the Persian: to access hidden water reserves with minimal surface disturbance and evaporation, a direct technological lineage drawn through the bedrock. This ancient dialogue between city and water is not confined to history books. It defines the fate of modern megacities. Consider Los Angeles, a metropolis of millions built in a semi-arid basin. Its existence depends on a web of imported water, channeled from the distant Sierra Nevada mountains and the Colorado River through hundreds of miles of canals and pipelines. It is a Roman-scale solution for a modern age. Or look to Dubai, a glittering emblem of ambition rising from a desert. It maintains its lush landscapes and soaring population through massive desalination plants that turn seawater into an energy-intensive process that represents another kind of aqueduct, one that conquers salinity instead of distance. These are not just engineering triumphs. They are the same calculated gambles taken by ancient rulers, betting that human ingenuity can permanently overcome geographical limits. This forces a profound and urgent question upon us. Are we, like the ancients, constructing magnificent, complex systems that contain the seeds of future vulnerability? Our modern networks are wonders of reliability, but they share the same potential frailties: centralized sources, long, exposed supply lines, and a foundational assumption that the climate of tomorrow will resemble the climate of today. A prolonged drought in the Colorado River basin or a seismic event along a major aqueduct would test our systems just as severely as it tested the Maya reservoirs. The lesson carved into the stones of Gard and whispered in the tunnels of the Qanats is not merely about technical skill, but about foresight. It asks us to look at our own towering achievements and see not just their strength, but their points of stress, to remember that every lifeline requires not just builders, but perpetual guardians. The conversation that began with the first city planner tracing a line to a distant spring is still unfolding, and the next chapter depends on what we learned from the last. High in the arid plains of southern Peru, a series of spirals are carved into the desert floor. These are not the famous lines, but something far more mysterious and functional. They are the entrances to an ancient and ingenious water system that allowed the culture to survive in one of the driest places on Earth. While their neighbors built towering aqueducts, they looked downward, creating a hidden, helical network to converse with the water table itself. It begins with a spiraling, stone-lined ramp that corkscrews down into the earth, sometimes descending over 30 feet. At the bottom, this ramp connects to a horizontal tunnel, a subterranean aqueduct that gently slopes for miles, tapping into a distant aquifer. The spiral design is the system's brilliant signature, but its purpose has sparked debate for decades. Some researchers argue it was primarily functional, a clever way to provide stable, cool access for maintenance crews to descend and clear silt from the tunnels. Others see a more profound dual purpose. The spiral shape could have acted as a wind catch, creating a natural ventilation shaft that used differences in air pressure to pull fresh air down into the tunnels, preventing dangerous gases from accumulating and ensuring the workers below could breathe. Yet, given the deep spiritual connection the people had with water in their desert world, many archaeologists believe the spirals also held powerful ritual significance. Descending that stone coil into the cool, dark earth to commune with the life-giving water source may have been a ceremonial act, blending the practical task of maintenance with an offering of respect. This fusion of utility and symbolism makes them uniquely captivating. They represent a hydraulic philosophy deeply attuned to its environment, where engineering was not about conquering the landscape, but about carefully listening to its hidden rhythms. The greatest enigma surrounding them, however, is not their function, but their age. Unlike Roman structures dated by inscriptions or Maya reservoirs tied to known kings, they are notoriously difficult to pin down. They are built from materials that cannot be carbon dated, and their continuous use and repair over centuries have blurred the archaeological record. Some estimates suggest they were begun around 2,000 years ago, while others propose a later origin. This uncertainty only deepens their mystery. Were they the foundational innovation that allowed the culture to flourish and create their vast, or were they a later, desperate adaptation to a worsening climate? They stand as a silent reminder that our understanding of ancient ingenuity is always incomplete. They challenge the very image of what an aqueduct should be, showing us that survival in the most extreme environments could demand not just brute force engineering, but a graceful, coiled collaboration with the earth itself. The spirals of them remind us that water was never just a physical substance. In the minds of the people who built these systems, it was a sacred force, a gift from the divine that demanded reverence as much as it required engineering. To truly understand why these monumental projects endured for generations, we must look beyond the stone and mortar into the realm of belief. For many ancient cultures, managing water was not merely a technical task, it was a profound religious duty, a direct collaboration with the gods to maintain the balance of the world itself. Consider the Khmer Empire at Angkor. Their vast, those immense rectangular reservoirs were far more than clever water tanks. They were symbolic oceans, meticulously aligned replicas of the cosmic sea from Hindu mythology. The central temple mountain, Angkor Wat, represented Mount, the axis of the universe. The surrounding moat and the great beyond it were the earthly manifestations of the primordial waters that encircled the sacred mountain. Every drop of monsoon rain collected in those reservoirs was not just stored, it was. The act of maintaining the canals that fed was thus a ritual act of sustaining cosmic order. A king who dredged a silted channel was not just a civil engineer, he was a priest-king fulfilling his divine mandate to keep the universe in harmony. This spiritual framework provided an unshakable motivation for the backbreaking, communal labor required. It transformed a public works project into a sacred pilgrimage, ensuring that the entire society, from the noble to the farmer, saw their role in the water system as part of a larger celestial purpose. The Romans, for all their practical genius, operated under a similar spiritual contract. When an aqueduct was completed, it was not merely inaugurated, it was consecrated. The aqua was dedicated to the gods, its waters considered a divine blessing bestowed upon the city. Temples and altars were often built at the source springs, honoring nymphs or specific deities believed to inhabit and protect the waters. The Vestal Virgins, Rome's most sacred priestesses, drew water only from specific springs fed by the aqueducts for their rituals. This intertwining of the sacred and the practical created a powerful social glue. Maintenance of the aqueduct was not just a matter for the water commissioner, it was a communal religious obligation. Neglecting a clogged channel was not only a civic failure, it could be seen as an affront to the gods, risking divine displeasure and drought. This fusion of faith and function was of social organization. It aligned the most practical need for survival with the deepest human yearning for cosmic meaning. The ritual sacrifice performed at the opening of a new Qanat shaft or the prayers offered at a public fountain inn were investments in more than infrastructure. They were investments in collective identity and commitment. It ensured that the care for these lifelines was woven into the very fabric of culture, passed down through generations not as a manual of techniques, but as a sacred story. The stones carried the weight of the arch, but the rituals carried the weight of responsibility, making the survival of the city a shared spiritual endeavor as much as an engineering one. The stones endured because of what held them together. A Roman aqueduct was more than a line of arches. It was a chemical masterpiece, a permanent bond between material and purpose. The true revolution lay not in the shape of the arch, but in the mix poured into its form. This was opus, Roman concrete, a material so advanced that modern science is still unraveling its secrets. Unlike the simple lime mortar used for centuries, Roman concrete was a composite. Builders would mix a volcanic ash called pozzolana, named for the town of near Mount Vesuvius, with lime and small stones. When combined with water, this mixture triggered a remarkable chemical reaction. The pozzolana, rich in silica and alumina, reacted with the lime to form crystals that interlocked as they hardened. This created a paste that was not only incredibly strong but, most importantly, hydraulic, meaning it could set and cure even when completely submerged in water. This single property transformed what was possible. It meant aqueduct channels could be built directly across riverbeds or through perpetually wet ground without dissolving. It allowed for the construction of massive harbor moles that jutted into the sea, their concrete actually growing stronger as seawater percolated through it, forming new mineral structures that sealed cracks over time. This was a self-healing material, a concept modern engineers are only now beginning to replicate in labs. The concrete formed the core, but the finish was just as clever. For the inner surface of the water channel, where a smooth, impermeable barrier was essential, they applied opus. This was a slick plaster made from lime and crushed, the broken pottery and tiles of everyday life. When set, it created a glassy, waterproof lining that minimized friction, allowing the water to glide along with minimal resistance and preventing seepage that could erode the structure from within. The Romans also understood the need to move water through pressure. For this, they turned to piping. In wealthy districts and for key junctions, they used sheets of lead, bent and soldered into tubes. They were aware of lead's dangers, with writers like Vitruvius noting its harmful effects, yet the metal's malleability and resistance to bursting under pressure made it a practical, if tragic, choice for critical connections. For broader, safer distribution, they relied on pipes, sections of fired clay joined with mortar, a technology that remained standard for centuries. Each material was selected for a specific role in the hydraulic orchestra. The volcanic concrete provided the enduring, water-resistant bones. The lining offered a seamless, fast track for the flow. The pipes, whether lead or clay, directed the current with precision. This empirical materials science, developed through centuries of trial and observation, gave the aqueduct its resilience. It could withstand the constant push of water, the expansion of winter frost, and the slow grind of centuries because its very substance was engineered to become one with the element it carried. The longevity we marvel at in the ruins today was not an accident. It was the result of a deep, chemical conversation between human ingenuity and the very minerals of the earth. A city's walls could be 20 feet thick, but its true vulnerability was a single stone channel. In the calculus of ancient warfare, the aqueduct was not just infrastructure. It was the ultimate strategic target, a soft artery running straight to the heart of a besieged metropolis. To cut the water was to start a clock, one that ticked down the days until thirst forced a surrender. This brutal reality transformed hydraulic engineering from a civic duty into a core discipline of military science. Defenders knew this, and they designed accordingly. The soaring arches of an aqueduct bridge were not merely elegant, they were fortresses in disguise. At key crossings, especially over ravines or rivers, these structures were built with massive, defensible gatehouses. Thick walls, narrow access points, and positions for archers turned a vulnerable span into a stronghold that had to be stormed and held. For underground sections, Security meant secrecy and guardianship. The access shafts to subterranean conduits were often concealed or built within fortified compounds, patrolled by soldiers whose sole duty was to protect the silent flow beneath their feet. The goal was to make the lifeline as defensible as the city walls themselves, turning a linear weakness into a chain of strongpoints. The siege of Jerusalem in the year 70 offers a stark lesson. The Roman legions, under the future Emperor Titus, encircled the city. Their strategy was multifaceted, but a key objective was to sever Jerusalem's water. Historical accounts describe how the Romans systematically targeted and destroyed the aqueducts and conduits that fed the city from distant springs and the famous pool of Siloam. With the external supply cut, Jerusalem's massive population was forced to rely on limited and quickly depleted internal cisterns. The suffering within the walls grew as the siege wore on, demonstrating with terrible clarity that a city could starve for water long before it starved for food. Control of the aqueduct was control of the city's fate, yet this strategic thinking applied equally to the offense. A Roman army on the march was a mobile city, and it needed a reliable water supply for its thousands of soldiers and camp followers. When establishing a long-term siege camp, Roman military engineers would often construct temporary aqueducts. Using wooden troughs, leather pipes, and quickly dug channels, they would divert nearby streams or springs directly into the fortified encampment. This ensured a constant, secure supply for the besieging force, preventing them from becoming vulnerable to the same scarcity they were imposing on their enemy. It was a profound display of logistical dominance, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. These actions reveal a fundamental truth of ancient geopolitics. Control of water was synonymous with control of territory. A kingdom's borders were often defined not just by mountains or rivers, but by the reach of its aqueducts and the springs they commanded. Building an aqueduct into a newly conquered region was an act of permanent possession, a declaration that the land and its resources now served a distant capital. Conversely, destroying an enemy's water system was an act of erasure, rendering a region incapable of supporting a large, rebellious population. The aqueduct, therefore, stood at the intersection of civic life and military power. It was both the giver of urban peace and the primary target in war, a paradox that forced engineers to design with two opposing minds, one for the prosperity of peace and another for the grim arithmetic of siege. The same graceful arch that carried life into a bustling city square could, in a time of conflict, become the most fiercely contested ground for miles, because everyone understood what flowed across it was not just water, but time itself. A straight line drawn across a map represents the shortest distance, but also a declaration of intent. Roman engineers, in their pursuit of water, embodied this philosophy of conquest. Their aqueducts were triumphs of geometry over geography, imposing a rigid human order upon the chaotic landscape. Water was a resource to be captured at its source, then channeled, contained, and directed along an unwavering, engineered path. The arch was the ultimate symbol of this mindset, a structure that allowed the conduit to stride over valleys and obstacles without deviating from its calculated course. It was a system built on command, on the belief that nature's flow could and should be bent to serve the needs of the metropolis. This technological willpower reflected a broader cultural impulse, one that saw the natural world as a domain to be mastered, surveyed, and subdued for the glory of the state. The aqueduct was a linear extension of imperial power, reaching out from the city to claim distant resources and pull them, inexorably, toward the center. Half a world away, in the fertile basin of China's Min River, a different philosophy took shape, one not of conquest, but of conversation. Faced with catastrophic seasonal floods that could wipe out harvests and a parallel threat of drought, Li Bing, a governor of the Qin state in the 3rd century before the Common Era, proposed a radical solution. Instead of building a massive dam to block the powerful river, he designed the system to gently persuade it. His approach was one of intelligent diversion, working with the river's own energy rather than opposing it head-on. The system's heart is the, or fish mouth levee, a long, tapered dividing wall built from woven bamboo cages filled with stones. This ingenious structure was positioned in the middle of the Min River, splitting the flow into two channels. The inner channel was carved deeper and narrower, designed to carry about 60% of the water, primarily for irrigation. The outer channel was wider and shallower, carrying the remainder, along with most of the destructive silt and floodwaters, safely past the agricultural plain and back to the main river downstream. To manage excess flow during the rainy season, Li Bing's engineers cut a channel through a mountain ridge, creating the, or precious bottleneck. This spillway acts as a natural safety valve, automatically draining surplus water from the inner irrigation channel when levels rise too high, preventing flooding. Finally, to control silt buildup, they constructed the, or flying sand weir, a low spillway that uses the river's own swirling currents to skim sediment from the inner channel and toss it over into the outer channel. The entire system operates without a single dam or gate that requires human operation. It is a self-regulating machine powered by hydrology and gravity, a design that has functioned continuously for over 2,300 years, still irrigating millions of acres of farmland today. The contrast in these two great traditions could not be more profound. The Roman model speaks of separation and redirection, creating a dedicated, artificial river that exists apart from the natural landscape to serve a single, urban purpose. The Chinese model speaks of integration and balance, embedding itself within the natural river system to nurture an agricultural region. One represents a linear extraction for concentrated power, the other a cyclical distribution for widespread sustenance. This divergence reveals a crucial insight, that technology is never culturally neutral. The way a society moves water is a direct reflection of how it views its relationship to the world around it. Is nature an adversary to be overcome or a partner to be understood? Is the goal to fuel an empire's glory or to ensure a region's enduring fertility? These ancient choices, carved in stone and etched into riverbeds, show us that the solutions to survival are as much about philosophy as they are about physics. They ask us to consider the values embedded in our own vast, modern networks and what kind of relationship with the natural world those systems ultimately represent. The true power of a flowing stream is not just in what it carries, but in what it can move. While aqueducts quenched thirst and cleansed streets, their most transformative gift was harnessing the water's own energy to turn the wheels of industry. This silent, ceaseless force became the engine of an ancient economic revolution, transforming raw materials into wealth and cities into manufacturing hubs. Beyond the public fountain, the water was put to work. One of the most vital applications was in milling grain. A steady, powerful flow could turn a heavy millstone grinding wheat into flour with a consistency and scale impossible by hand. The mill complex in southern France stands as a staggering example. Here, an aqueduct fed a cascading series of 16 separate water wheels arranged on a steep hillside, creating an industrial staircase of grinding power. Historians estimate it could produce enough flour in a single day to feed the entire population of nearby Arles, a city of 10,000 people. This was not a cottage industry, it was factory-scale production, powered entirely by gravity and human ingenuity. The same principle applied to sawmills, where flowing water drove blades to cut timber, and to pounding mills, where trip hammers were raised and dropped to full cloth or crush ore. Water became the first reliable, non-human motor, liberating labor for other tasks, and creating goods in volumes that fueled trade and surplus. This industrial pulse created specialized districts within the metropolis. The relentless need for water in certain processes shaped the very map of the city. Take the Roman fullery, or a facility for cleaning and processing woolen cloth. The work was notoriously pungent, requiring large amounts of fresh water for rinsing and alkaline substances like human urine as a cleansing agent. These operations were almost always located near major aqueduct inflows or along specific branches with robust water pressure and drainage. They formed industrial quarters, centers of noise, smell, and intense economic activity. The water did more than clean. It powered the fulling process itself, often driving mechanisms that agitated the cloth. This concentration of industry created jobs, from the millers and sawyers to the fullers and tanners, fostering a complex urban economy far beyond basic agriculture or trade. A city with such powered industry could produce more than it consumed, generating wealth that could be taxed, traded, or invested in further grandeur. Perhaps the most dramatic fusion of aqueduct and industry was in mining. At Las in Spain, the Romans sought gold not just with picks, but with hydraulic might. They channeled water from mountain streams through vast networks of canals and reservoirs high above the gold-bearing hills. Then, in a technique called, or the wrecking of mountains, they would suddenly release this pent-up water into a network of tunnels dug into the hillside. The catastrophic torrent would literally blast apart the soft rock, washing entire slopes down into sluices where the heavier gold could be separated from the debris. This was aqueduct engineering turned into a weapon of mass extraction, a deliberate, calculated use of water pressure to reshape geology for profit. The scale was monumental, leaving behind a surreal, eroded landscape that still whispers of the immense forces unleashed. Here, the aqueduct was not bringing life to a city, but enabling the systematic harvest of a continent's wealth, demonstrating that water's value was measured in denarii as much as in drops. This shift marks a profound evolution in the purpose of urban water. The aqueduct began as a lifeline for survival, then became a tool for hygiene and civic pride, and ultimately matured into the primary power source for pre-industrial manufacturing. It allowed cities to become centers of production, not just consumption. The constant, reliable flow meant industry could operate day and night, independent of human stamina or the whims of the weather. In this sense, the aqueduct networks of Rome or Constantinople were the direct precursors to the coal-fired steam engines of the 18th century. They proved a fundamental principle that controlling energy in a reliable, concentrated form is the key to economic complexity and growth. The water that flowed from the mountain spring did more than sustain a population. It powered the workshops, fed the mills, and washed the wool that clothed an empire. It turned the city from a mere gathering of people into a productive, pulsating powerhouse, its rhythm set not by the seasons, but by the unwavering gradient of stone channels and the endless turning of water wheels in the dark. The written word gave their ambition a permanent voice. While the stones tell us how they built, the surviving manuals tell us why, revealing a world where engineering was already a formal discipline governed by rules, records, and remarkable bureaucracy. The most direct window into this mindset comes from Sextus Julius, a man who was, for a time, the water commissioner of Rome. His personal account reads less like a celebration and more like a meticulous audit. He lists every aqueduct by name, its source, its length, and its precise daily delivery in a Roman unit of flow. He details the legal allocations, specifying exactly how much water was earmarked for public fountains, for bathhouses, and for private individuals by imperial grant. His tone is often one of frustration, complaining about the corruption of previous administrators who allowed illegal taps and measurements for personal gain. Was not just describing a system, he was enforcing a standard of transparent, accountable management. He wanted to create an unassailable record so that no one could steal the city's lifeblood in the shadows. His work proves that by the 1st century, Rome viewed its water network not as a collection of monuments, but as a quantifiable public utility, requiring the same rigorous oversight as the treasury or the grain supply. This bureaucratic genius was supported by the foundational textbook of the era, Vitruvius's 10 books on architecture. While managed, Vitruvius instructed. His volumes are a comprehensive encyclopedia of the engineering arts. He dedicates entire sections to finding good water sources, testing its purity by observing its effect on copper vessels or the health of local residents. He provides explicit instructions for constructing aqueduct channels, specifying the ideal slope, the proper composition of mortar, and even the need for regular maintenance shafts. He writes about the tools and the materials like pozzolana ash for hydraulic concrete. Vitruvius, what had been learned through centuries of trial and error, transforming craft knowledge into teachable, repeatable science. His goal was to create a legacy of sound practice so that future builders in any province of the empire could replicate Rome's success. Beyond these famous texts, the story is etched in stone itself. Inscriptions on surviving aqueducts, milestones along their routes, and legal tablets record the funding for these projects, often noting the emperor or local benefactor who paid for a specific section. They document construction timelines and the names of the chief engineers. They even spell out the complex legal framework of water rights, adjudicating disputes between cities or between public and private users. One inscription might settle a conflict over a diverted spring, while another grants a landowner the right to draw a certain amount of water for his orchard, so long as it does not impair the public supply. These documents reveal a society that had moved far beyond improvisation. They show a highly literate, systematized approach to infrastructure, where every aspect, from the initial survey to the final legal right to a cupful, was meant to be planned, recorded, and maintained according to established protocol. This paperwork was the true blueprint, the intellectual scaffolding that made the physical scaffolding possible. It tells us that the aqueduct's greatest strength was not in any single arch, but in the system of thought that could conceive of it, fund it, build it correctly, and then argue in court over its use for generations to come. The manuals and the laws turned flowing water into a managed commodity, and in doing so, they built something even more enduring than concrete, the framework of a civilization that believed its greatest works could, and should, be governed by reason and record. The sound of a public fountain was the true heartbeat of the ancient city. It was a constant, gentle murmur beneath the noise of the streets, a sound of community and necessity woven together. This was not the grand, ceremonial nymphaeum with its marble statues, though those existed for display. The true social engine was the neighborhood fountain house, a simple stone basin fed by a bronze spout where the aqueduct's long journey finally met the people it was built to serve. Here, the monumental scale of engineering shrank to a human measure, to the weight of a clay jar and the patience of a daily queue. Archaeology gives us the stage for this daily drama. Excavations from Pompeii to Athens reveal these utilitarian structures, often at street corners or in small plazas. They were built for function, with a continuous ledge for placing jars and a drain to carry away spills. The stone around the spout is often worn smooth, even deeply grooved, by centuries of jars being slid into place, a physical record of countless repetitions. This was predominantly the domain of women, servants, and enslaved individuals, whose labor of water collection framed the rhythm of the household day. Literary snippets from across the ancient world, from Greek comedies to Roman graffiti, capture the fountain as a buzzing social hub. It was a place where news was exchanged, gossip was parsed, and the mood of the city could be taken like a temperature. A long line might signal a problem upstream, a break in the channel. A neighbor's absence might spark concern or speculation. The act of collecting water was a great social equalizer in its burden, though not in its consequence. The wealthy might have water piped directly into their villas, but the majority of the city's inhabitants knew the fountain's schedule intimately. You would hear the conversations in snatches, the complaints about a difficult landlord, the news of a birth or a loss, the price of grain, or the latest rumor from the forum. For many, especially those confined to domestic spheres, this was a vital window to the world, a rare moment of sanctioned public presence and shared experience. The full jar balanced on a head or a hip was more than just water. It was information, connection, and the literal sustenance for the day's meals, cleanliness, and survival. This intimate, grindingly routine scene is the ultimate answer to the question of why these vast projects were undertaken. The aqueduct's success was not by engineers in miles of channel or cubic meters per day, but by the simple, recurring fact of a full jar. It was measured in the time saved from walking to a distant, polluted well, in the reduced toll of waterborne illness on children, and in the strength of the social fabric woven at the fountain's edge. The graceful arch spanning a valley existed for this mundane, essential moment, the splash of clean water into a waiting vessel. When we reduce these systems to mere engineering marvels, we miss their profound human purpose. They were built not for glory alone, but to transform the daily struggle for a fundamental resource into an opportunity for community, to turn a task of survival into a thread in the social tapestry. The true monument was not the stone conduit, but the gathered crowd around the flowing spout, the chatter rising with the morning sun, and the secure knowledge that today, at least, the city's thirst would be met. The final lesson from these stone channels is not about their strength, but about their flexibility. True resilience was never found in a single, magnificent aqueduct stretching to the horizon. It was found in the quiet diversity of a city's water portfolio, a lesson written in the layered infrastructure of the most enduring places. The civilizations that lasted longest understood that survival demanded multiple, overlapping strategies. They combined the distant reliability of a spring-fed aqueduct with the immediate security of vast, covered cisterns. They paired river-fed canals with networks of household wells and neighborhood reservoirs. This was hydraulic redundancy, a deliberate plan for the day when one source would inevitably fail. When the aqua was damaged by an earthquake, Rome did not fall silent, because the aqua still flowed. When invaders cut one conduit into Constantinople, the city drew from its deep, hidden basins. The most brilliant engineering was the kind that offered not just a primary solution, but a secondary and a tertiary one, creating a web of supply where the breaking of a single thread did not unravel the whole tapestry. This technical diversity had to be matched by institutional strength. A redundant system is useless without the organized will to maintain it. The meticulous records of, the trained corps of maintenance crews, and the legal frameworks governing water rights were not bureaucratic afterthoughts. They were the social software required to run the physical hardware. A system could be perfectly designed, but if corruption siphoned off its flow or political collapse ended its upkeep, it became a relic within generations. Sociopolitical stability provided the long-term perspective, the consistent funding, and the communal discipline needed to clear the silt, repair the arches, and enforce fair distribution year after year, decade after decade. The technology provided the capacity, but the institutions provided the continuity. In stark contrast, we can see the shadows of systems that carried the seeds of their own stress. An aqueduct that allowed a city to grow far beyond the local environment's carrying capacity created a dangerous dependency. A mining operation that used aqueducts to blast apart mountains for gold generated immense wealth, but left behind a sterile landscape. A water network built on the coerced labor of thousands, while delivering freedom to a privileged few, created a social fragility that could erupt when drought tightened its grip. In these cases, the engineering solved an immediate problem, but did so in a way that intensified longer-term ecological or social pressures. The water flowed, but at a cost that accumulated invisibly until the balance finally tipped. The overarching insight is humbling. Technological brilliance on its own was never enough. The grandest arch could not compensate for a short-sighted ruler. The most precise gradient was meaningless without a community committed to its preservation. The ancient megacities that thrived did so because they viewed water management as a perpetual, adaptive conversation, one that required robust engineering responsive institutions, and a profound respect for the limits of their environment. They built for abundance, but they planned for scarcity. This is the legacy that speaks directly to our modern world of sprawling megacities and complex, centralized grids. Our own resilience will be measured not by the sheer scale of our dams or the length of our pipelines, but by the diversity of our sources, the redundancy of our networks, and the strength of our collective commitment to steward them. The water that once flowed through Roman channels asks us a final, quiet question. Are we building mere monuments of efficiency, or are we cultivating living systems that can bend without breaking? Under the pressure of an uncertain future, these ghostly arcs across forgotten landscapes are a bold signature, a declaration written in stone that some civilizations refuse to be conquered by their own thirst. From the cool, whispering tunnels of the Qanat to the thunderous arrival of water in a Roman fountain, these structures were testaments to a shared human truth, that survival is not a passive state, but an active, ingenious negotiation with the world. They mastered water's own quiet logic, the unwavering pull of gravity, and bent it to their will with a precision that still humbles us today. Their legacy is a lesson in three parts, etched into every channel and cistern. First, respect the resource itself, understand its sources, its limits, and its sacred place in the order of things. Second, plan not just for today's need, but for tomorrow's crisis, building with a gradient of foresight that spans generations. And third, understand that the most brilliant design is only as strong as the collective will to maintain it, to send the caretaker into the dark tunnel to clear the silt, year after year. Now our own megacities face a familiar trial under a new sky. Rising temperatures and shifting rain patterns ask us the same urgent question those ancient engineers grappled with. How do you keep a giant alive when the old rhythms of the world begin to change? Our pipelines and reservoirs are the new aqueducts. Our desalination plants the new Qanats. The challenge before us is not merely technological, it is philosophical. Will we look at these ancient lines of stone and see only ruins, or will we recognize in them a blueprint for resilience? Will we learn from their hydraulic wisdom, the value of redundant sources and distributed systems, or will we repeat their vulnerabilities, building magnificent, centralized networks that forget how to adapt? The water that once flowed to Rome, to Angkor, asks for our attention now. It asks us to build and care for the channels of our future with the same blend of boldness, humility, and unwavering care. The answer, for our cities and our civilization, will flow through the choices we make next.